Welcome back to Beyond Wisdom, where we explore timeless truths for a more peaceful and meaningful life. In our fast-paced, hyper-connected world, we often look outside ourselves for meaning, chasing answers through achievements, opinions, or endless information. But the deepest questions have never changed. Who am I? Why do I feel this way? What do I truly want? Long before psychology or self-help books, ancient cultures held powerful, quiet methods for exploring the soul. Today, we'll rediscover how they taught self-knowledge, not as something to fix, but as something to remember. In most ancient societies, knowing yourself wasn't just useful, it was sacred. The famous phrase, "Know thyself," was inscribed at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece. But this wasn't just a philosophical motto. It was considered a divine instruction. The Greeks believed that true self-knowledge brought a person closer to the divine, not because they became perfect, but because they became honest. Knowing yourself was about aligning with your true nature, not editing it for social approval. This is very different from the modern approach, where self-awareness often becomes another form of self-optimization. In contrast, ancient wisdom pointed inward with reverence, a kind of spiritual archaeology. You weren't building something new. You were carefully uncovering what had always been there. Many ancient cultures created daily or seasonal rituals to pause, reflect, and reconnect with the self. In ancient Egypt, people believed the soul was composed of several parts, including the ba, the personality or soul aspect that lived on after death, and the ka, the vital life force. To stay in harmony, reflection was woven into life, not just reserved for crisis. At night, individuals would mentally review their day, asking, "Did I live with balance? Did I act with truth?" Similarly, in Vedic India, self-inquiry was part of daily spiritual practice. The question, "Who am I?" or ko hum in Sanskrit, was not meant to be answered with words, but with stillness. It was about observing the self behind the mind, the part of you that never changes. In modern life, we often react instead of reflect. But in these traditions, reflection was a rhythm, a way of staying close to one's essence through simplicity and slowness. Rather than personality tests or self-help frameworks, ancient cultures used stories, rich with symbols and metaphors, as mirrors for the soul. The Aboriginal Dreamtime stories in Australia weren't just legends, they were maps of inner life. A tale of a wandering ancestor wasn't only about a journey through the land. It was a story of internal movement, fear, courage, transformation. In West African Yoruba traditions, the Orisha stories offered similar guidance. Each deity represented not just a force of nature, but an archetype of human behavior. By listening to these stories, people didn't just learn morals. They recognized themselves: a hot-tempered warrior, a wise grandmother, a curious child. These were not others, but inner parts of the self. Through myth, the ancients taught self-awareness without needing to name it. The lesson was this: you don't need to explain yourself to know yourself. Sometimes, you just need the right story to reflect what you already feel. In the modern world, silence is often seen as empty, something to be filled with sound, information, or entertainment. But in many ancient cultures, silence was seen as the teacher itself. The Lakota people of North America spoke of silence as a sign of deep respect and understanding. When you are in doubt, They said, "Be silent." Similarly, Taoist sages in ancient China warned that too much talking disturbed the natural balance of thought and feeling. Self-knowledge was not extracted through analysis. It was revealed through quiet observation. Imagine sitting by a river, not to explain it, but simply to watch. That was how they viewed the self. The more you spoke about it, the less you understood it. This approach still lives in practices like Zen meditation, where the aim is not to control the mind, but to sit with it. Just as clouds drift across the sky, thoughts come and go, and in the stillness between them, something more lasting is felt. One of the most overlooked aspects of ancient self-knowledge is how deeply it was connected to community. In modern culture, self-discovery is often treated as a solo journey. But traditional societies knew that the self does not exist in isolation. In Ubuntu philosophy from Southern Africa, there's a saying, "I am because we are." Self-understanding wasn't found through separation, but through relationship. You learned who you were by how you treated others, how you handled conflict, how you responded to joy or suffering within the group. Even in ancient Japanese culture, the concept of kokoro, meaning heart, mind, and spirit, was understood to be shaped by one's presence in community. People didn't say, "This is who I am," no matter what. They said, "This is who I am, in relationship to you." This is not about people-pleasing. It's about understanding that your truest self is revealed in the way you live, not in what you believe alone, but in how you show up for others. Long before psychology turned inward, ancient people turned outward, to the sky, the seasons, the rivers, and the stars. For them, the natural world wasn't separate from the inner world. A storm outside might reflect turmoil within. The phases of the moon were reminders of emotional cycles. The Mayans, for instance, tracked time in complex calendars, not just to predict seasons, but to understand patterns of consciousness. The outer world was a mirror, a guide to what was happening inside. The Stoics, too, believed in observing nature to understand the soul. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should live like the vine that produces grapes, without complaint, quietly fulfilling its nature. He saw the changing of the seasons as a lesson in acceptance. Today, we tend to separate our mental life from the earth. But ancient wisdom reminds us to understand yourself, watch the world. When you begin to notice how the morning light feels, how the trees move, how the air smells before rain, you're not escaping the self. You're remembering it. True self-knowledge, the ancients taught, is not about having answers. It's about asking better questions. Socrates, one of history's most famous philosophers, insisted he was wise only because he knew how little he knew. This wasn't false modesty. It was an invitation to stay curious, open, and humble. In Buddhist teachings, the concept of beginner's mind holds the same spirit. When we think we know who we are, we stop listening. But when we admit we don't fully know, we begin to truly see. The ancient Chinese classic Tao Te Ching teaches that those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. This paradox isn't meant to confuse. It's meant to remind us that the self is not a thing to be explained, but a mystery to be lived. Humility opens the door to real insight. And in that openness, something deeper than knowledge begins to emerge, a kind of quiet wisdom that doesn't need to prove itself. The path to self-knowledge in ancient cultures was not linear, not loud, and not about self-improvement. It was about remembrance, a return to rhythm, to ritual, to silence, to story. It invited us to see ourselves not as broken puzzles to solve, but as living beings already whole, just clouded by noise. The forgotten way was never really forgotten. It lives quietly, waiting, in the spaces we often overlook. In a quiet moment, a deep breath, an old story, a walk in nature. You don't need to master yourself. You only need to meet yourself, gently, honestly, and without hurry. What is one forgotten practice from your own roots, or another tradition that helps you feel more connected to yourself? Share it in the comments. Thanks for watching. If this video brought you value, subscribe to Beyond Wisdom. Until next time, stay calm, stay strong, and stay wise.